Celeste here, gonna be reading from Bronze Dragon Codex by R.D. Henham. Here's the prologue, let's go. Smil never was sure what woke her that day. One moment she was deeply asleep, as were her parents, and indeed all the good dragons on Krynn, and the next moment she was suddenly awake. Banished thousands of years ago, the good dragons passed most of their time in slumber, but Smil was suddenly awake and instantly bored. Smil stretched and yawned. A small bolt of lightning shot from her mouth and struck the sandy floor harmlessly. Smil jumped, both surprised and pleased. She had never used lightning before, and she couldn't wait to do it again. Stretching her neck, Smil opened her mouth, but no lightning came. She pouted, wanting to show off her new trick to someone. Shooting lightning randomly, it would take many more years for her to learn to control it, meant she was almost big enough to learn to swim, if anyone ever woke up. Her parents lay coiled a few feet away, dragging her thin tail through the damp sand. Smil padded over to them, then stood up on her hind legs to look closer. In slumber, they both looked as though they had been delicately molded out of bronze. Her mother's horns were not quite as long as her father's, and there was a delicacy to her neck frill that Smil's father's lacked. But other than that, the two were like twin statues. Their only movements the rise of their massive chests in sleep, and every once in a while the flicker of a purple-gray tongue as one or the other let out a particularly rough breath. "Mother? Father?" Smil tapped each parent lightly on the head. Neither of them budged. Smil sighed. This wasn't the first time she awoken while everyone else snoozed. They rarely woke when she tried to rouse them, and the one time she succeeded, they gave her such a tongue-lashing that she wasn't sure it was such a good idea to try again. So instead she wandered to the next chamber, where her siblings still slumbered. The tide came in regularly here, washing over the eggs and keeping them healthy. Unlike Smil's eggs, which had hatched early, her father liked to tease her that she couldn't wait to enter the world. The other 5 eggs remained unhatched. They glittered there as if sunlight shone on them. She tipped her head, pondering the huge bronze orbs. Perhaps all they needed was a little encouragement. Smil nudged one with her nose. The egg rocked backward slightly, then forward to tap her forehead. Smil giggled and raised a tiny claw to tap it back. Clatter, scrape. Smil whirled about, her claws still raised in the air. There it was again, a far-off sound that was not the waves at the cave entrance. A quick glance showed her parents still slept deeply. What was it? Smil cocked her head and then gasped. Voices in the cavern. Smil had never seen any living creature other than her parents and Uncle Nuvar, who slept in the next cave over. She knew there had to be more dragons around, and all sorts of animals roamed the Dragon Isles. Smil considered waking her parents. She decided against that as she set off down the path that led to the ocean. She would see who those beings were, then bring them to her parents. As Smil walked down the sandy corridor, the voices became louder. She hid behind a rock to get a look at the visitors. Why did they send us to this sauna? Smil frowned. It wasn't an animal, and whoever it was didn't even speak Draconic. Smil didn't recognize the language, but her mother had told her that dragons could understand any creature on Krynn. This would be something entirely new, something she'd never seen before. Smil picked around the rock. Though total darkness engulfed this part of the cave, Smil's vision was better than most creatures. She saw 2 figures, both standing on 2 legs, and not much taller than her, although considerably thinner through the torso. No horns or scales. Their faces and forelimbs looked like the inside of shrimp. Shrimp things, Smil silently dubbed them, though if they were shrimp, they were giant ones. I curse the day we drew this mission, the shrimp thing who had spoken said before. His whisper breaking the silence like a whip crack. His companion clamped a hand over his mouth and whispered, Shrek. The faintest glow of light surrounded them like a halo. Now Smil could see that the lumps she'd taken to be shrimp things' bodies were animal skins draped over their forms. No wonder, Smil sniffed, looking at their pink faces and hands. Without scales, they would need protection. The first shrimp thing carried a long, sharp tooth tied to his waist, as well as a string arced in a round leather container filled with sticks. The other was smaller, with longer fur growing from her head. It had a more delicate look to it, so Smil thought they must be male and female like her parents. Numerous pouches hung from the female's belt. Smil could smell all sorts of disgusting and appealing scents emanating from the pouches. The shrimp things stood silent for a moment, listening. The far-off sound of even restful breathing echoed through the caves, except the rhythm of the waves. A trip to this infernal cave better be worth it, Milla, the male grumbled in a low voice, then coughed into one hand. I can barely breathe for all the salt. While the air had a touch of moisture and even more of a taste of salt, it was a comfortable humidity. Samil took a few deep breaths. The air seemed fine to her. What was the air like where these beings came from? If your delicate constitution can bear some heat and salt, Drew, you will find that this trip is indeed well worth it, the female said. Milam, the male, had called her. A low rumble echoed through the cavern. Milam's green eyes widened. With a motion of one slender hand, she extinguished the faint light. You must trust me, she told Juro. I can guide us. Juro placed one hand on Milam's shoulder and followed in her footsteps, heading straight to Samil. Samil ducked back into the shadows, suddenly shy. What would she say to these creatures? They walked past her, not noticing the bronze dragon Wormly, whose eyes followed their every move. Once they were a bit ahead of her, Samil shadowed the two shrimp things. The farther they trotted, the louder the size of Samil's parents grew, and the more the air round them stirred. A particularly noisy sigh, almost a huff, lifted the shrimp thing's head fur in ripples. What is this place? Drew looked in the direction of the loudest breathing and gasped. He stood face to face with Samil's father. The dragon's head, resting on the floor, was fully as tall as Juro. The eyes, large as melons, were closed in sleep. If Samil's father were to open his eyes, he could crunch his teeth around Juro as easily as a smaller creature eating a berry. Juro backed away, stumbling over a rock, and fell. Looking around wildly, he spotted Samil's mother behind him. He sank to the floor, unable to do anything but look back and forth between the two slumbering dragons. Milam walked to Juro and put her hands on his shoulders, steadying him. Yes, she whispered, they do exist, but they do not concern us. Of course we exist, Samil exclaimed, bounding over to the two shrimp things. They both swung towards Samil, Juro drawing the long metal tooth and pointing it at her, and Milam reaching a hand into her pouch. Samil skidded to a halt in front of them. I'm Samil, and those are my parents. Who are you? Did you come to visit us? Milam put one hand on Juro's arm, making him lower the sword. Her eyes went to Samil, to her parents, and to the chamber beyond, then back to Samil. They narrowed slightly. I am Milam, little wormling. Milam held up one hand that slightly shook. Samil flicked it with her tongue, and Milam seemed to relax. Are you alone here? My parents are asleep, Samil said, sniffing Juro. He smelled strange, almost like rotten fish. My siblings are still in their eggs and won't come out to play. Samil looked at Milam hopefully. Will you play with me? Of course, little one, Milam said, scooping a rock the size of her fist from the ground. But first, can you answer me this? How many siblings do you have? 5, Samil said. She was very proud of her counting skills. Very good, wormling. Milam looked at the rock in her hand and muttered Kalana. The plain rock shimmered and became a glittering diamond. Samil gasped in delight as the large diamond bounced toward her and rolled to a stop at her feet. Never had Samil seen a gem so sparkly and pretty. Samil batted the diamond with one claw, and it flew across the cave in a twinkling arc. She clambered after it, swiping her tail at it, and the diamond flew even further. Samil smiled, revealing rows of delicately pointed teeth. Samil's parents often allowed her to play with their treasure, but their tastes ran to coral and gold, not glittering gems like this diamond. Milam was nice. Samil wasn't sure about Juro, but someone who would give her something so pretty was surely a friend. Samil wasn't sure how long she played with the diamond. She became lost in the glittering clear depths of her toy, which was so like water on the brightest day. She followed the diamond through the cave, batting it further and further. Suddenly, an anguished wail echoed through the cave. Samil jerked up from the diamond. Why was she here, so far from the nest? Smil took the diamond in her mouth and ran back to her parents. As she ran, more howls echoed through the cave, shaking rock loose from the ceiling. When Smil reached the main part of their cave, she skidded to a halt and thumped into her mother's flank. Her mother whirled to face her, inhaling sharply. When she focused her blazing bronze eyes upon Smil, she sobbed. Smil, his father said, reaching down to cradle both paws. Where were you? We thought something terrible happened to you. I was chasing this, Smil said, dropping the diamond at her parents' feet. A rock? You left the nest for a rock? Her mother choked. Not just a rock, Smil said. See how sparkly it? Smil lost all words as she looked upon the object she dropped from her mouth. It was no longer a diamond with thousands of glittering facets. Smil had been chasing a rock, exactly the millions of rocks in the cave. But I'm here, Smil said. I heard you crying. I'm here. And we're so glad you're safe, her father said, holding her tighter. But something terrible has happened. Smil's father moved so Smil could look into the egg chamber. Smil gasped, and the tiniest bolt of lightning shot from her mouth to strike harmlessly on the sandy floor. The eggs were gone. All 5 of the wondrous, shimmering bronze eggs had been taken. What happened? Smil said in a small voice. Did you move them? She asked, clinging to one small hope. Smil's mother shook her head. They were stolen, judging by the smell, I'd say by humans. Humans? I only saw... Smil began, then her mother picked her up and forced her to look her in the eyes. Smil told about the shrimp things and the diamond, and her parents began to wail. They could not speak, but Smil knew. Malam and Juro had stolen her siblings. They were not friends at all. They were evil. Smil curled into a ball against her mother and father. The 3 of them stood there, weeping tears that hissed and crackled on the sandy niche that once served as the nest. Smil cried until she could cry no more and fell asleep exhausted. 2 words in the tongue of dragons resounded in her brain, as though burned there by a brand. Dartek, McTrek, I hate humans. And that's the end of the prologue.